Theater can be very expressive and performances can feel over the top at times, and with this show in particular, you can even say some actors were hamming it up. Hamilton stars Lin Manuel Miranda as Alexander Hamilton, who arrives in New York in 1776 after leaving his hometown in Nevis. He soon becomes an aide to George Washington, played by Christopher Jackson, in the Revolutionary War, and afterwards he becomes the first United States Secretary of State, which results in tensions rising between his friend turned political rival Aaron Burr, played by Leslie Odom Jr. This is a recording of the popular Broadway musical with the original cast, and I'm just gonna say up front, I am perfectly okay with this being the way I first experienced this. I live in New York, but I never got to see the play, mainly because tickets were impossible to get, and when they were available, they were really expensive. I wanted to see it, but not that bad. That being said, you can definitely feel the difference between seeing a play live and watching a recording of it, and it's felt here multiple times. Part of the experience in theater is having everyone right there next to you enjoying the show together, and there's a certain feel-good energy in the room that you can't recreate from watching in the comfort of your own home. But we do hear the sound of the audience reacting at times, mainly applauding after a big song, and it is a little heartwarming to hear, and it's the closest thing we get to actually feeling like we're in the room. As far as the filming aspect of this goes, it was fine for the most part. It was shot well. My one thing is, even though it cuts a lot, it mainly is made up of wide shots as it's trying to get everything that's going on in the room. We do get close-ups of the actors, but not too many, and to be honest, they could have and should have taken more advantage of this. That way we could have gotten a much better look at things like actors' facial expressions. And there are times where we can see things that are going on in the background, but they're not as clear as what's going on in the foreground. And the camera doesn't go in when it should have. The camera stays far away, and not all the time. I'm not trying to say this like it's a major issue. Especially since within the musical, there is a rotating stage, so they do try getting in as much as they can. But the excessive wide shots just keep the audience at home feeling at a distance. And I think it could have made for a much more immersive experience with more close-ups. That way we can feel some of the emotions a little better at times. Despite some issues with the filmed aspect of things, the musical itself is very good. For those who aren't aware, all the dialogue is either sung, rapped, or done through spoken word. So I will say up front, if you don't like musicals, or if you don't particularly care for this music by the first few songs, you're not gonna care for this at all, because the music makes up the entire show. If you've ever seen Les Miserables before, same idea. But I absolutely love the music. I thought it was all wonderful. I'd say most of my favorite songs were from the first act, in particular the song Alexander Hamilton, as well as My Shot and Helpless. All extremely energetic. Though from the second act, I also enjoyed The Room Where It Happens and One Last Time. I actually don't dislike any songs from the second act, to be clear. There wasn't anything I found bad, but the songs from the first act have catchier beats and hook you in faster. Though we do get rap battles between Daveed Diggs and Lin Manuel Miranda in the second act, and those are a lot of fun. They were so rapid fire and so intense, and it was mesmerizing. Everyone in the cast does an excellent job here. Like, as catchy as the songs were, the delivery is even more fantastic, mainly in the supporting cast. I mean, Lin Manuel Miranda is good. He's a pretty charismatic guy, and he makes for a solid Hamilton. But all the major players in the supporting cast are so on point that they blow him out of the water. Leslie Odom Jr. is phenomenal. He has such a good singing voice, and it really stands out in The Room Where It Happens. Like, he is a gift to musical theater. He won the Best Actor in a Musical Tony for this, and it's easy to see why. I'd also say he had one of the most nuanced performances. If you know how Aaron Burr is regularly portrayed in history books and you only had that to go off of, I think you'll agree this is the closest to humane I've ever seen him portrayed. Like, there were times it even felt like he was the true protagonist, and I found that to be very interesting. Both Phillipa Soo and Renee Elise Goldsberry were also wonderful as Hamilton's wife and her sister, respectively. The Schuyler sisters from the first act was another song I particularly enjoyed, and they both knocked it out of the park there. Their voices are truly powerful, and I both felt they were even stronger in the second act. They had a little more time on screen, or I should say stage, there, and that's where they really shined. Their acting was some of the strongest elements of the second act. Goldsberry in particular had easily the best voice in the entire cast. I was very happy to see that she won the Tony for Best Supporting Actress in a Musical because that was well deserved. Jonathan Groff appears as King George III. He's only in for a few scenes. He pops up briefly a few times in the first act and then he shows up one more time in the second act. But he is very funny. He plays King George up as very eccentric and his body language is exaggerated. It was some much needed comic relief. Christopher Jackson I also enjoyed a lot as Washington. He just had this very grand, booming presence about him. You knew when he was in the room. He took control of every scene that he was in and he was just mesmerizing. But hands down, my absolute favorite performance, without a doubt, was Daveed Diggs, who appears in a dual role as Marquis de Lafayette in the first act and as Thomas Jefferson in the second act. Like, my god. I first saw him in Blind Spotting and I always appreciated his talent since then, but this is a whole other level. The man would rap at such a rapid fire pace, and at times he'd also do it while just running around all over stage. It was just this really explosive energy. Like, there were a few times I thought he was gonna jump out of the screen at me, and everything he said and everything he rapped, even with such quick delivery and movement, was catchy and coherent, and it was incredible. The amount of talent he has is jaw-dropping. And he'd also be pretty funny at times. He'd make these little quips or he'd have these side-eyed facial expressions. I laughed quite a few times at him. He won the Tony for Best Supporting Actor in a Musical, and like all the other awards the cast members for this received, this was completely well-deserved. I'm glad he especially was recognized. Now I really can't wait to see a new film that takes full advantage of the talent and energy that he has. As for the story, that was solid. It covers nearly 30 years of Hamilton's life, and it gets through a lot. So much that even at 2.5 hours, it still felt like there was more that needed to be covered. Events like the Revolutionary War go by just like that. It's all very quick, and while you will learn some new historical facts from seeing this, just keep in mind we get a very condensed version of events. There's also a very positive, feel-good, let's all come together vibe through this. And it was great, though at times it does give off this romanticized telling of events. Like, not all the time. The second act can especially feel somber, and it does go a little bit into things such as Hamilton's flaws, which we get a brief glimpse of. There are times Miranda portrays him in a less than favorable light. And like I said earlier, there are times where it's questionable if either Hamilton or Burr is the true protagonist. Like, it goes back and forth. So while it's not present through the entire musical, there is this sort of sugary sweet vibe to it at times. Last thing I'll say is, since events can go by really quick, I didn't fully get right away who some of the minor characters were that we only saw for a few scenes. Some come and go so quickly before it fully clicked who they were. This partially has to do with the fact that some actors outside of the ensemble play multiple roles. Like, we saw this clearly with Daveed Diggs, but there are a few other actors who appear in the first act as one character and then show back up in the second act as someone else. And it threw me off a few times. So there were times I wasn't sure who was who. But despite my criticisms, they didn't ruin this for me. I still had an absolute great time with this. At the end of the day, the music is what's at front and center here, and I enjoy that tremendously, so I wasn't disappointed by this. So after 5 years of hype, I can safely say Hamilton was worth seeing. And like I said, I'm perfectly okay with the first time having been on Disney+. While it's not going to fully recreate the feel of seeing it live and it shows, it's still a wonderful time. While we get a very condensed version of historical events, it's still a brilliantly acted musical, with some big standouts being Leslie Odom Jr., Renee Elise Goldsberry, and Daveed Diggs. Plus it's got some excellent dancing, wonderful singing, impressive rapping, and really catchy songs, giving it a nice feel-good energy and certainly making it worth your time. Hamilton gets an 8 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Hamilton or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you get to see it live, and how does it compare seeing it on Disney+? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, I'll catch you next time.